if injury and inflammation are the cause, why is heart disease and cardiovascular disease so much more prevalent now than 100 years ago?
Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I am your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I am here with my co-host, Elwyn Robinson. And today we are talking cardiovascular health. So Elwyn, as always, why this topic? Why today?
Yeah, good question. One of the companies that I work with, they asked me to formulate something to help people with this, to be honest. So that's where I really got into it. A lot of the time I get into it for personal reasons, because I have an issue with it, because someone that's close to me has an issue with it, because a client has an issue with it. But in this case, it was for that reason. But I kind of wanted an excuse to get into it because, of course, it's the number one killer in a lot of countries. And when it's not number one, it's number two. So actually, for a while now, I've been I don't get into things from a purely academic point of view. It's always practical for me. I want to know how to actually help someone. So in this case, I was very happy to have that invitation. And actually, as I got into it more and more, I realized, this is not something that's separate from everything that I look at. It's not that I thought it would be entirely separate, but I didn't realize how inextricably bound up it would be with issues that I do have. And I was like, you know what? I don't have cardiovascular disease yet, but I can see that unless I resolve these issues that I am aware of, I probably will do eventually, because the root causes that are actually the same. So it became personal for me over time. Of course, it's one of those things that, unlike I think everything else that we've talked about so far, it doesn't make you suffer. This is the thing. You don't realize that you have it in a lot of cases until it's become a really severe issue. So it's one of those things where, and also it's one of those things where preventing is so much better than trying to fix it once it's already got really bad. And early warning signs like high blood pressure that, probably a lot of people who are watching this suffer from. These are great early warning signs that, again, you don't notice, you don't realize it, but if someone's pointed it out to you, that's a great indicator to become aware of this stuff now and actually help with it.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Prevention is the course that I think most people would like to take, rather than having to do the cleanup afterwards, because that's not necessarily always very pretty and can be not so great on the body or for those around us.
Once it involves medical procedures and cutting you open and putting in stents and all the rest of it, and even replacing valves, and yeah, that's look, if you have to do it, you have to do it, but it's something that is much better to avoid if you possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you give us a brief overview of the cardiovascular system and its purpose?
Yes. So, dictionary definition, it's a network of organs and tissues. They transport oxygen, nutrients, hormones. A lot of time we talk about peptides. It's an example of the kind of nutrient stroke hormone that would be transporting around. But basically everything. I like to think of it as the body's internal feeding system. It's providing every cell of the body, basically, with a few exceptions, like maybe bone, some of the bone, but pretty much every cell of the body is getting its nutrients from the cardiovascular system. But also, it's also taking away the waste from the cells. So, and the cardiovascular system actually technically includes the lymphatic system, which we often categorize as part of the detoxification system, which you could also certainly put it under. But detoxification system isn't really a classification that most mainstream medical science people get into too much. It's not something they focus on, which I think is a mistake, as we'll talk about. But yeah, so the heart, the blood vessels, the lymph system. So, fundamentally it's bringing nutrients to the cells and taking waste away from the cells. I think that's the simplest way of looking at it.
Yeah, I used to think that it was like the cardiovascular system, the blood was, kind of like the kitchen, or that's how I had it explained to me at one point. And the lymphatic system was like the sewer system. So, because I used to think, oh no, they're totally separate. But, as you're saying here, they are intertwined. So
that's a good metaphor. I
yeah,
like that.
yeah, no, it was really great. And then that leads me to my next question, because the heart has the pump, and it's, the mechanism of action around that. So it's designed to, pump the blood through the system, but, having the lymphatic system, which doesn't have a pump. I mean, can you talk to us all a little bit about, what the mechanisms of that system and how it functions and how we can understand it to know how it works better.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the mainstream idea that the cardiovascular system is like entirely dependent on the pump, which is the heart, is not 100% accurate. It often ends up becoming 100% accurate, but this is part of the problem. So my understanding is that all of the arteries and the veins as well, if they're healthy, they are also pumping, like they're pulsating. They are like helping with that process of moving things through. And as they become blocked and as they become rigidified, as they become more dense and tough and lack that flexibility and juiciness and all the rest of it, that's where then the heart starts to struggle to pump everything through. Not just because of the blockages in the system, but also because the system itself is no longer doing that. And if that sounds crazy, as you said, the lymphatic system doesn't have a pump. So the lymphatic system is entirely dependent on what I just said, on the pumping of the pulsating of the tubes from our own movement and just even breathing, right? Breathing is a simple pumping system that is one of the primary things that helps the lymphatic system to move. And I think that's one of the benefits of exercise. That's why, Genetic Insights, I think it's the number one recommendation or maybe number two in terms of scientific evidence for like this huge list of different conditions. And it's always recommended by everyone. And this is one of the reasons because it is supporting that process. I have to say that for myself, I have a desk job these days, as it were, but I feel the healthiest when I'm physically active, not just going to the gym an hour a day, but hours and hours and hours every day, walking, lifting stuff up, carrying stuff, moving stuff around, whatever it may be. Like, it absolutely makes me feel better. I think everyone can relate to that if they have a reasonable level of health. If you're very unhealthy, you're not going to relate to that. You're going to feel worse because it's going to feel depleting. But if you have a reasonable level of health or more, then you can relate to that, how activity is beneficial. And I think that's one of the ways that the mainstream doesn't really acknowledge.
No, I agree with that because as well, I've become more sedentary through my work as well. And I've definitely noticed when the kids were young, was walking them to school every day, that was a there and back all the time. So I was much more physically active within my, if you want to call it the total daily energy expenditure, because I was just moving so much more. And as well, now today, I know just an hour in the gym isn't going to do it. So I've got to have a lot more movement in the day. And as you say, I definitely feel the difference on the days where I do and the days where I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, can you talk to me a little bit about the relationship between the cardiovascular system and the nervous system? Because there is that, that electricity that's running through us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not going to go into stuff I could do about the electrical system of the body, and that's more, I don't know, esoteric or alternative. I'll just give the mainstream perspective on this. So the mainstream perspective is basically the central nervous system is, you can think of it as the brain, an extension of the brain that goes throughout most of the body. So I would look at it as like the central nervous system as the intelligent part of our body, and it controls and directs every other system in the body, including the cardiovascular system. Now, not only, and this is the bit where it could get a bit more esoteric, the mainstream perspective is to think of it being totally controlling and directive. The more alternative perspective is to go, actually, it's more of a two-way street, that the heart is actually giving a lot of information, even direction and commands to the central nervous system, that there's kind of another nervous system separate from the central nervous system in the digestive tract that again, is giving signals and commands to the central nervous system. Now, this is definitely the case to some degree from a mainstream point of view. I'd say like every single system is giving feedback to the central nervous system. Basically, the central nervous system, just like with the cardiovascular system, it goes two ways. It sends directive signals out, but then it takes perceptive signals in, right? Like, in order to know what's going on, it is receiving information, everything, right? The skin tells you, information about what's going on. Your eyes tell you information. The eyes are actually part of the central nervous system. But, every other system is giving directions to the central nervous system in terms of what's going on. But, as I say, the more alternative point of view is that the heart kind of actually has a mind of its own and actually is controlling quite a lot more than we think. That's the ancient Eastern perspective in various different cultures, for instance. I definitely think there is a benefit in heart coherence. I think that's been proven scientifically, may not be totally mainstream. And so what heart coherence is basically like a reading of the way the heart rate is. If it's too, monotonous and predictable, that's actually a sign of a lack of health. That's a sign that we're under stress. So a heart coherence monitor can certainly give like early indications of the health of the heart, but usually it's more used to measure stress, which is more of a central nervous system activity. So, and then, in terms of the other way around, the cardiovascular system feeds every other system of the body, including the central nervous system. So if you have central nervous system issues, stress, anxiety, depression, or even, numbness, tingling, or chronic pain, all those kind of things, there can be a cardiovascular system component to that. In other words, it can be because the cardiovascular system is not providing enough nutrition to the central nervous system. So they really support each other. I would say it's like the brain and the heart. That would be like the metaphorical way of looking at it. And they're both super important, and they're both crucial, and they're definitely intertwined.
Well, yeah, thank you. I have done a little bit with the heart method, heart coherence, so that's been helpful. But sometimes I'm like looking at it and going, "Wait a minute, I'm not doing as well as I thought I was." So I definitely still need some more practice, and maybe we can go into that another time. But
there's a trick to that. If you do a heart coherence test, like I know the chiropractor that my wife goes to, they do one when they do their assessments, and basically if you slow your breathing down to 5 to 6 breaths a minute, you'll always score really high on the heart coherence test. So that's the cheat if you want to pretend you're a lot less stressed than you are in your test results. Now, of course, that's the cheat to do it for like a minute while you're being tested, but that's actually the benefit of doing that type of breathing in general. If you do 5 to 6 breaths a minute for, say, 10 minutes, half an hour, whatever it might be, you can do that while you're watching TV. It doesn't have to be a special thing, although obviously, or scrolling through social media or whatever you do to unwind. But obviously, if you did it while focusing on your heart, while focusing on peaceful thoughts, grateful thoughts, while meditating and all the rest, all the better. I think there's something about how a lot of traditional prayers kind of encourage, through the length of the thing that you recite, encourage 5 to 6 breaths a minute. So that's, I've not validated that personally by testing it, but that's an idea which, sounds nice at least. But yeah, so breathing in that way where you breathe 5 to 6 breaths a minute definitely is the way to ace those tests.
good trick. So you briefly touched on it earlier about the detoxification system and its relationship with the heart, with the blood system. Can you briefly touch on that a little bit more, in the sense of, how, and I know we're going to do a detoxification episode at some point, so I know we'll get into the nitty gritty of it then.
Probably several.
Yeah, probably. So if you could just give us just a quick overview before we get into the meat of this one, just so that can help everybody understand it a little bit better.
Well, I'll get into it a bit more, I would say, when we start talking about the causes. Okay. But just to, talk about, like, is it part of the detoxification system? I actually think this depends on what you mean. So the arteries and veins, they don't process toxicity. So the veins are involved in the excretion process, let's just say. So cells excreting waste, the veins then take them and transport them away. And of course, in that primary thing that's thought of as waste, but as we talked about in a previous episode, and we'll talk about later, is not really, is carbon dioxide. But yeah, but it does transport away waste products. Now the lymph will absorb, as you say, it's like a sewage system absorbing, or doing its best to absorb, excess waste from the cardiovascular system. And the lymph is involved in processing more than excreting. And generally, when kind of, again, more mainstream talks about detoxification, they're really thinking of processing rather than excreting. I mean, technically, and I always used to teach this, I've kind of adjusted this a little bit because it really depends on how you look at it, but the biggest detoxification organ in the body is the lungs, because the most volume is excreted from the lungs. However, it's also true to say that the biggest detoxification or the most important detoxification organ in the body is the liver, because the liver processes more waste. So again, it depends on what you're looking at. And you could also say that the liver is the primary one because although it doesn't deal with as much volume as the lungs, it deals with the most toxic stuff. So in terms of concentration of toxicity, the liver is really dealing with that as well. So yeah, I won't get too much into detoxification. We'll talk about that maybe in a little bit, and definitely more. I'm thinking the next episode we'll really get into it, because by the end of this, hopefully people are really going to want to learn more about detoxification. That's my goal.
Wonderful. And you did briefly touch on which is one of the things that sparked this, is the relationship between the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system, because obviously those two are very much intertwined. And then the breath and the carbon dioxide, as you mentioned, and you may be getting into that later on when we get further into it, unless there's anything you want to add right now about that.
Yeah, I could touch on it. So basically, the respiratory system is really involved in bringing in the primary nutrient. Right, the primary nutrient is oxygen. We think of it as food, sugar, glucose, maybe, but that's secondary. As I talked about in a previous episode, most ATP, which is cellular energy, really comes from oxygen. The amount of ATP that you get from 1 unit of glucose or food is up to 19 times less if there's not oxygen present than there is oxygen present. So we could look at it that actually most of the energy you create, especially if we're healthy and we are in an aerobic state cellularly, most of the energy we create actually comes from oxygen. So it's our primary nutrient. Obviously, there's the whole thing about you can only survive a few minutes without air, you can survive a few days without water, you can survive often a few months without food. So it really is our primary nutrient from any perspective, and the lungs are responsible for that. I won't go too much into the lungs in this episode, but they're responsible for filtering that air as well that it comes in to some degree. The respiratory system certainly is, and dealing with all the stuff that comes with the air that we don't want, and it's kind of another story. But basically, with the cardiovascular system, I would say it's more of a transporting in, transporting out. And then, the kidneys are doing a lot of processing of the blood itself. And then liver is doing a lot of the processing of the toxicity other than what's in the blood, if that makes sense. All the other toxicity that's everywhere else, including especially the digestive system, but really everywhere.
Which brings me to the big kahuna question. What is cardiovascular disease? Let's get into that.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not a doctor. The disclaimer at the beginning. As I've acknowledged, this is only something I've got into recently. The only reason I felt the confidence to talk about it is because I realized, there are aspects to this that are being ignored. So whenever there's a situation, and quite possibly, through ignorance, not purposefully, like people just don't know, but I started listening to quite a few doctors. I won't name any of them because I'm not trying to start a beef with anyone, but people who are well known, people who are, have large followings, people who just in some ways are very good and are on the cutting edge of things and who I appreciate and think are great. But in this area of cardiovascular disease, whenever a perspective, whether it's mainstream or alternative, produces such poor results, I always want to ask, is it missing something? And look, I've got friends who are into all kinds of fringe things as well, conspiracy theories and theories about diet and theories about this and theories about that. And again, I'm skeptical of that too. But when there's such a large sample size, when there's literally billions of people following a particular way of thinking and getting the results that we're currently getting, which is mass levels of death of cardiovascular disease, part of it is that it's easy to blame the user, the end user. So meaning could say, well, we told them to improve their diet. We told them to exercise more. We told them to quit smoking. They didn't do it and they died, right? So it's easy to do that. And there is an element of truth to that. If we lived a healthier lifestyle, then we would have less cardiovascular disease. But the challenge is, what is healthier lifestyle? And that's one of the things that we're going to get into. That's not as simple as it seems. And in fact, a lot of the recommendations for that are wrong. Even exercise, the thing I said we could all agree on, I've talked about it in previous episodes. In a lot of cases, for people, it's as easy to over-exercise as under-exercise. It's not. And people tend to swing between them. They tend to, not do anything or hardly do anything. And then, in January or whatever, they decide to get fit and then they overdo it and they probably make themselves even worse than if they weren't doing it. So none of this stuff is easy. But anyway, let me actually ask the question. What is cardiovascular disease? So I'm going to give you the mainstream perspective throughout most of this answer. And then at the end, probably I'll get into more, but this is what I think they're missing. So, it's a disease that affects the whole cardiovascular system, everything I talked about, but usually we're talking more about the arteries and the vein and the heart, not so much the lymph. Usually a thing that affects lymph that turns into a medical situation is more cancer. So in this case, we're not talking about that. So the majority of the time, the issue is some kind of blockage or obstruction becoming excessive. So we'll talk in a minute what those blockages and obstructions are, because that's really key to the whole conversation. But when I say excessive, I mean it goes from being a partial blockage to a full blockage. And depending on where that occurs, it can create a different situation. So if it occurs in the heart, we call that heart disease. We call that heart attack. If it happens in the brain, then we call that a stroke. And if it, although that's also bleeding in the brain, but let's just focus on blockages for a minute. And then if it happens in like a leg or an arm, we call that peripheral artery disease. So those are, usually the three categories of where it's going to happen. All of these are life-threatening, even in the leg or the arm, although that's not normally as life-threatening. Obviously, if there is a lack of blood and therefore nutrients getting to the brain because of the importance of the central nervous system, which we talked a little bit about earlier, or there is a lack of ability for any part of our primary pump that we talked about to work, that is life-threatening and can kill us, within seconds, stroke minutes. So that's, however, the peripheral artery disease is no joke either, and is still like really dangerous and life-threatening as well. So, as I said, it's where the blockage or obstruction becomes excessive. Often, I think the understanding is it's where like a piece of the blockage breaks off and becomes a full blockage. So it's rarely just that, to say this is the tube, and it's rarely that just over time it becomes more and more blocked till still there's nothing. It's not quite that. It's more like it narrows more and more, and at some point, some of it breaks away, creates a full block. And then we've got a problem. That's I believe that's the mainstream understanding. There is also the issue of internal bleeding. I will not focus on that as much because I don't have the same level of understanding on it, and it's not as common. But I do have some understanding, and I'll be sharing that. But I want to focus more on the blockage because I feel like, well, first of all, that is much more common reason for ultimately death from any kind of cardiovascular disease. And second of all, I feel it's actually not that difficult to deal with if you actually understand it and know what to do. I personally, if I had to have a diagnosis between the top two things that kill you, I would prefer to have a CV diagnosis than a big C diagnosis. I already said the word earlier, but I'll try not to keep saying it because both of them are horrific, don't get me wrong, but out of the two horrors, I would prefer cardiovascular. I feel it is more deal-withable, it is more resolvable, more easily deal-withable and resolvable. And yeah, I mean, I don't think that's anything. I think that's a mainstream perspective, right? That's why a lot of people who have these issues are told just reduce stress, increase exercise, improve diet, but there is certainly more to it, which we'll get into. Okay, so what causes that blockage? I think that's the key question. Or not what causes it, sorry, just what is it?
Yeah, what is the blockage? What's in that blockage? What's coming? What's getting in the way?
So again, so far everything I said is mainstream. I'll carry on in mainstream. So Again, I was researching this recently, and I was interested to see the terminology that was used. So this blockage is in response to injury or inflammation. That's the first thing that they say. And so in response to injury or inflammation, and by injury, I think we're talking about specifically like tearing or the potential of tearing in any of the, usually specifically arteries, the body will look to patch that up.
Can you also explain like why would an artery tear? Like what would be present?
I want to get into that later, because
Okay.
that is the thing that the mainstream doesn't address.
Okay.
So I want to do the mainstream thing first. It's a good question. It's the $1 million question. But yeah, let me give the mainstream thing first. So in response to that, it just happens, right? That's the mainstream perspective. Your body will lay down this stuff called fibrin, which is a protein. It's not that dissimilar from the scar tissue that forms when you cut your external skin, right? So it's like a scar tissue. And along with that, it will start the clotting process. So all of your arteries, obviously they're full of blood. We haven't talked about that, but I assume it's because everyone knows it. And so one of the things that the blood contains, other than all these nutrients and waste if it's going the other way, is these clotting factors. The body is just waiting, platelets specifically. The body is just waiting for its circumstances. And of course, we talked mainly about arteries, but there's capillaries, right? It's not like arteries serve every cell in the body, like these bigger tubes, but then it goes into smaller tubes and it goes into smaller tubes until, so while damage to a major artery is quite unusual unless you're in some kind of violent or accident situation, a damage to a capillary happens all the time, right? You could accidentally I don't know, knock your shin against something or bash your elbow or anything like. So even everyday stuff will potentially damage and injure those capillaries, right? And so then the body responds by patching it up ASAP, because internal bleeding is extremely dangerous for a couple of different reasons. First of all, because if blood is where it's not supposed to be, that's going to cause an issue. For instance, if it gets into the lungs, you can drown by it. But more importantly, because blood is a really scarce and precious resource, and so we don't want to lose any. And it's a precious resource, and also the amount that you have is very, very key, which relates to this thing called blood pressure. So your body is kind of always trying to compensate for that. Now, you can give blood, right? You can give a certain amount. I'm not quite sure exactly how much they take. It's like a pint or something like that. But they have to be really careful. They have to make sure that, your body is able to replenish it. Otherwise, again, it can be dangerous. So there's only a certain amount of blood you can lose. So anyway, any chance of any of it leaking, the body's on it, right? Patch up. And so it's using this protein stuff, fibrin, and then it's clotting. And so that will, it's kind of like super sticky, and it's basically like patching it over, healing it over. Now, that's often like the first thing to happen. Now, then there's this other thing. Again, I know all this is going to sound a bit weird because I'm not talking about what causes it yet, but then there's this other thing called inflammation. So inflammation, again, mainstream, what is inflammation? Inflammation is an immune response. It's an immune response to something. Why is there an immune response going on in your arteries? A place that is supposed to be, again, from mainstream medical perspective, what's the word where there's no bacteria?
Sterile,
thank you. The blood is supposed to be sterile. So why is there this immune response going on within the blood? Well, again, I don't feel like the mainstream has great answers for this. I think, one of the things that's posited is that it's kind of like an autoimmune condition. So like it's your immune system reacting to things mistakenly. And so the combination of this kind of scar tissue forming to deal with these minor injuries, micro tears, abrasions, whatever you want to call it, plus its inflammation, Your body is then like trying to patch that over. And this, I think I might be straying it out of the mainstream now. I think what they say is that the arterial, I think actually it depends who you listen to the mainstream. I don't think this is super set, but the arterial plaque is generally described as just building up, I believe, although it does depend who you listen to. My understanding is it's not so much that, and it's more that the arterial plaque is building up as a kind of salve, as a kind of soothing, protective mechanism. Because if there is something in there, even though there shouldn't be, because it's meant to be sterile and it's meant to be pure and it's meant to be clean, if there is something in there chronically antagonizing the immune system, and one of the examples for this is allergens, right? So if an allergen gets in because you're breathing it in, or an allergen gets in because you have increased intestinal permeability, which they call leaky gut, usually, colloquially. If that happens, then you might have proteins in your bloodstream that your immune system thinks are attackers, even though they're not. And then, of course, when there is an actual breakage in the artery going beyond the skin, or even the capillary that goes beyond the skin, then actual bacteria that lives on the surface of your body could penetrate that barrier and go into the bloodstream, right? So there is a genuine reason for the immune system to there, and there's a genuine immune response going on. So the immune system could be responding to stuff that's got in through the skin. But remember, technically, the whole respiratory system is outside the body. Part of the urinary system is outside the body. And most importantly, the whole digestive tract is technically outside the body. So anything that leaks into the bloodstream from any of those places that shouldn't be there can trigger an immune response. So this is one of the reasons that's speculated as to why there is inflammation in the arteries that I think is valid. That could be it. There's some kind of protein got in, whether it's pollen, whether it's gluten, whether it's whatever, and maybe your immune system's reacting to it. I think mold toxins are another big one. We'll talk about that more when we get into detoxification. But molds themselves can't get in through the lungs and pass into the blood. But mold toxins, mycotoxins, are small enough that they can penetrate through the respiratory system into the bloodstream, along with oxygen and all the rest of it. So there's various ways that different things that the immune system could react to could get into the bloodstream, right? So anyway, there's this inflammatory response. And so it seems, again, this is not, I don't think, entirely mainstream, but that laying a layer of plaque is kind of like a protective measure. So in the same way, if you cut your skin, yes, your body starts forming that clotting factor. Yes, your body starts forming that scar tissue, but ideally, you're going to put a little bit of salve on there and you're going to put a plaster on there. So that's kind of like a metaphor for it. Just cover it up, right? To make sure that if it gets another bump, it's not just going to open the wound right back up again, right? So that's my understanding of why there is arterial plaque. To those who say, well, what's that based on? I would say, look, the body doesn't do anything for no good reason. Often it does things that are unhelpful, like we just talked about an example, right? Where the immune system is attacking things that are relatively harmless, like protein from food or protein from stuff that we breathed in, like pollen. But the point is, it's not doing it for no reason. It thinks it's an invader, right? And it's the same with the laying down of arterial plaque in the arteries. Yes, it can be unhelpful and it can kill you, but it's not doing it for no reason. That would still be my perspective. There's some reason why it's actually doing it. And my understanding is that's exactly what it is. And when we talk more about the liver, you'll see hopefully there's an example of it there. So what is it made of? It's mainly made of cholesterol and calcium. And we'll talk about, both of those things, I would say, next. But yeah, just want to make sure. So what is cardiovascular disease? Did I answer that fully? Did I leave anything out?
No, I think, yeah, you essentially, just relating it to the blockages that are caused within the body, and how that, and what that plaque is that creates those blockages. So, and depending on where they are, how they show up, that's how they're defined. And, pretty much, yeah, it's a serious condition.
Yes. And so obviously when a high pressure tube based system becomes more and more blocked, more and more pressure will build up. And so that's the high blood pressure thing. There are obviously other things that can cause high blood pressure, like stress, because that will cause the tubes to constrict. So it's not only about blockage, but if it's chronically always high, then that's more likely to be blockage. And that's why one thing I do agree with the mainstream perspective on, well, one of many things I do agree with them on, is that high blood pressure absolutely is an excellent, helpful early warning sign of you having this issue, and it's not something to be ignored. Now, it can be transitory if you have the test done while you're in a situation of high stress. I did hear one of those medical doctors actually that I was listening to point out, I think very correctly, that the way that blood pressure tests are often done is incorrect, in that they often, put you in doctor's place, sit you down, and then immediately start taking it. I'm not saying everyone does this. Many times they don't. But if they do, that's not really correct. You should be sitting down for at least 5 minutes and as calm as possible as well. If you're like, that's also not going to give a good example. If you're, screaming and shouting or whatever, that's also. But if you are sitting down, relaxed, breathing calmly, not majorly stressed, 5 minutes, then that's when a blood pressure reading should be taken. Because of course it will be higher if you just be moving or exerting yourself. So
a quick thing that I also just want to bring in here about blood pressure too is something that I was found in some of my listenings, is that the blood pressure on the left side and the blood pressure on the right side, they are different, because you have two sides of the system. Because I know for my mom, who she went through and had some radiation treatment, that her blood pressure, because they would always take it from the side that wasn't treated, that blood pressure had its level. And I said, well, Mom, we need to check the other side. And it was drastically different from what was going on.
I completely agree with that. I could testify for that. Back a couple of years ago when I was testing all this stuff regularly, it would often be massively different. So I 100% agree. It's a good point. You should test both sides. And I made the doctors do that, test both sides, when I realized that from that point on. So, I say made, I insisted upon it. Let's put it that way. And I recommend you do too. Good point. Thank you, Chrissy.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good indicator to see what's going on each side. We've covered, what is cardiovascular disease. We've covered that the blockages are the culprits here, but can we get into, and I know you've briefly sort of touched on it a little bit, but can we get deeper into what causes the cardiovascular disease? Let's just see if we can get to these root causes, these root problems.
Yeah, and it's investigating this that made me decide I'd really like to do this episode to talk about it more, because this is the $1 trillion question. As I said, it's so prevalent. Whenever something is such a problem, I would say that we have to question authority. right? Whenever something is such a prevalent issue, and I count this for all areas of life, whatever. So the mainstream perspective says that this fibrin and plaque buildup is caused by inflammation of what we just talked about, and it's caused by injury. And with injury, as far as I can make out, what they're talking about is just what I said. It's like literal physical, bumps, whatever. But my question would be, why is that inflammation and injury of these blood vessels so common? And why is it so much more common now than it used to be? And I think that is the question which is not being addressed. Now, I spoke to this a little bit in the thyroid episode, for those of you who've watched that, where I talked about how one theory about that is genetics. And genetics do play a factor, and specifically that some advances in modern medicine, like antibiotics, means that those of us who have, quote unquote, I mean, this is a massive generalization, but weaker genes, we used to be killed earlier, either in childbirth or when we were young, by infectious diseases. And so now we're being kept alive by antibiotics and other things, better sanitation. And so that would mean that we can survive long enough to get heart disease. And I do still believe that that is a factor. So part of it is genetic. And absolutely, we have genetic tests for cardiovascular health, your tendency towards having an issue with that. We have it for cholesterol. I didn't actually check this before. I'm just going off the top of my head. We have it for lipoprotein A, which we'll talk about later. We have it for high blood pressure. We have it for low blood pressure. So the fact that we have all those reports and the fact that they're super accurate tells me, yes, there is a genetic component to this. So I don't want to undermine that. And that is also the mainstream perspective, what I just said, that the factors are largely genetic. But as much as, I have a genetic company, I'd love to say it's all about that. It's just not true. There are other major factors that are being ignored. So that's the ones that I want to talk about. But it is still worth seeing, what factor your genes have. And so obviously I do recommend the cardiovascular package from Genetic Insights if you haven't already got that, or if you if you're already a Limitless member, then you'll have access to those because you have access to everything. But if you don't already have that, I would recommend it if this is something that you're concerned about, because again, we only have so much time, we only have too much attention, we don't have so much energy, and so there's so many things we could focus on in life. And then, health is only a subcategory of life, and there's so many things we could focus on in health that I tend to find that, most of us don't do stuff because it's generally good. We have to know that it's actually relevant to us, right? And so that can really help you to see that it's relevant to you. I would say it's more important to do it with this than possibly any other type of genetic testing, for the reason that I just said, which is, that I said earlier, which is that there's much less early warning signs of this in terms of how you feel, right? With most other health issues, you'll start to feel bad. With this, you can feel fantastic 1 minute and then drop dead. There's all kinds of stories of that, people who are doing great, and then just there is nothing else that is more of a it came out of nowhere disease than this. And so I'd say it's all the more important to find out if you have genetic risk factors. Now, do I think you should test only genetics? No, I think you should do other actual specific tests to see what's going on for you right now. But again, often that costs money, that takes time, it takes energy. And so, and they can be very expensive if you have to pay for them yourself. Rather than if you live in a country with socialized medicine, they may not be willing to pay for it if you're a certain age or whatever. And if you got private, maybe your insurance isn't willing to cover it. So it's expensive often. And so it's really good to see again, do I have a genetic tendency to this? That can then motivate you to go, okay, this is worth dealing with. And again, if you don't have a genetic tendency to it, doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but that risk score means something. I stand by it, right? There's no 100%, there's no 0% in there, but it will help you to focus on what to prioritize on. So anyway, we'll talk about testing later. I know you normally like to check on that in the end, but going back to it. Okay, so genetic factors are a cause, but what else is there? Because while they've always been a cause, it doesn't answer the question that I asked before I started talking about this, right? Which is, if they are the cause, why, if injury and inflammation are the cause, why is heart disease and cardiovascular disease so much more prevalent now than 100 years ago? So I gave a maybe answer, right? Which is just that we're surviving long enough. That is an answer, but I don't believe it's it. So if you look at, again, inflammation's immune response, injury, I'm really thinking of micro tears, but I don't think it's just down to physical knocking, right? It's not only down to, so if we think about the skin itself, how might the skin get a hole in it that would need patching up with platelets? Let's examine that for a second, right? Okay, so one example is through abrasion, right? It could be because you have scraped it and because you've cut it. That is possible, right? And so that is also true of a capillary. If something penetrates your skin, it could penetrate a capillary, it could penetrate an artery. That is one potential cause. Okay, what else could happen to the skin that would cause it to be damaged enough that it would need platelets to come in there and heal it? Well, I can ask you actually, Chrissy. What are you thinking?
Yeah, burns. Cuts.
Burns, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Deep cut, lacerations, something like that.
Absolutely. So not too much fire getting inside arteries and capillaries, although of course it happens again. I mean, I was in a house fire in my early 20s and, as well as burning 10% of my skin, it definitely would have got down to some capillaries. So that could be it. Absolutely. What else though? What else can damage that skin enough?
I mean, well, yeah, I'm blanking, but beyond that, like deep sunburns could damage the skin, but it's not really going to tear it or open it in that regard. So
yeah, and still a burn,
yeah,
not unless you're a vampire.
Burn, yeah. So no, I'm gonna toss this one back to you, Owen. Enlighten us.
What about a corrosive?
Yes, absolutely, like a chemical.
Absolutely, a chemical. So there are chemicals out there that are so corrosive that they will burn holes in the skin. And so my question would be, because we're having less, there's way less violence that people are exposed to now than they were 200 years ago. There's way less physical knocks that people are being exposed to, right? We're not fighting our way through thickets of foliage these days. We're not climbing nearly as much as we used to. We're not lifting things nearly as much as we used to. So, so the physical knocks is not really going to be the thing for the injury that would account for why it's so much higher. The burns, we're not being exposed to as much burns as we used to be. So what are we being exposed to more? Corrosive materials, right? Which would more commonly be called toxins, right? Toxin just means poison. I think the Latin root for it is like an arrow or something like that. So funnily enough, something that pierces is actually the etymological root for the word toxin, but poisons, right? So could it be, I'll pose it as a question, could it be that the thing causing injury could actually be toxins, could actually be corrosive materials? I would actually say yes. This is the thing that the mainstream just doesn't recognize. It's interesting. Just a week ago or so, I watched one interview on the subject of cardiovascular health by, again, well-known experts. Both of them were experts, two doctors. And one asked the other, what factor do the and it's a good question coming from a mainstream doctor. I was impressed that they were even willing to ask that question. What impact do you think all of the chemicals in our environment are having on this situation that we're exposed to? Because we're exposed to chemicals. Chemicals are getting into the blood through every means. Our skin is exposed to all kinds of chemicals, a lot of which we put on voluntarily. When it goes into the skin, it goes straight into the bloodstream. The crazy thing, this is absolutely crazy, is that when it comes to an ingestible, yeah, there's still too many poisons in ingestibles for my liking, but there are reasonably tight regulations on what is allowed to be in there.
Yeah.
It's still often not enforced. It's still not strict enough, but it's there. In terms of what's allowed to be in a skin product of any kind, or any kind of product which is meant for contact with the skin, even if it's not a skin product, but any kind of product that could touch your skin. I'm talking about, cleaning products as well, stuff like that, right?
Absolutely.
Not just skin products.
No, absolutely.
Any of those.
It's going to get, we'll get into, I think I shared this in a previous episode. One of the biggest things was an eye-opener when I was doing my yoga teacher training course, is when a naturopath woman came to speak to us and talked about, would you ingest this? Would you do this? Would you do that? And she's like, then why is it on your skin? Because it's going to have the exact same impact. And so that made me, look at my laundry detergents, my cleaning supplies, and just my skin creams, my lotions, all of that. It really shifted things for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the amount of things we're in contact from that we're in contact with, that we breathe in, as we said, like there are certain things that won't cross that barrier from the lungs into the blood, but there are many things that will. And often it's the most toxic that will. Talking heavy metals like lead, they banned lead in petrol and gasoline, I guess you guys call it, in the 80s. But before that, we were breathing in tons of lead. There's asbestos, there's natural toxins, there's mold toxins, there's the toxins that bacteria create, like endotoxin, for instance, is the most prevalent one. There's stuff coming in for the respiratory system, the stuff coming for the skin. Oh, just back to the skin. You know why so much more toxicity is allowed in things that touch the skin rather than things that we ingest? It's because the official line of the government agencies that are supposed to be protecting us in this area is that they don't cross the barrier of the skin into the bloodstream. The interesting thing about that is that they license for use nicotine patches.
I was going to say, that makes absolutely no sense.
But the thing is, in their own world, if they had that bubble where that's true for them, that's one thing. But they also license drugs that are patches for you to absorb through the skin. And then there's also, this hormonal creams and stuff like that. But it's like, so how is that stuff getting in for the skin, but all of these other toxins aren't? That's a question I've yet to see answered by any of these people. So it's coming in through the skin. It's coming in through the lungs. It's coming in through what you eat. Those are the primary mechanisms. Oh, sorry. And the water you drink, what you ingest. And then some people also talk about radiation toxicity. They talk about EMFs, Wi-Fi, 5G, all that stuff. I don't like to focus on that too much not because I don't believe it, but because I like to focus on things that are easy to control. So the most easy to control is what you eat and drink and put on your skin. Less easy to control is what you breathe in, right? To some degree, you can't control it, but you can have air purifiers inside the house when you're indoors, stuff like that, in your office. So you can improve it, but you can't, do it perfectly. And then like radiation around you, sure. I mean, I know people who turn their Wi-Fi off at night and they're not using it and stuff like that. Good for you. You can do all that stuff if you want. But again, most of it you can't control. It's all around you. So, and one of the worst things for you is fear, stress, anxiety, worry. And so I say all this stuff. Hopefully you watched like the previous episodes. I said one of the reasons I'm doing how to feel good first is because I want you to be able to relax and focus on the positive before we start getting into all this stuff, because it can really freak you out when you start, oh my God, everything's around you is poisonous. So first of all, don't get into that mode. The stress is probably worse than the poison. That's the reality. I say probably, and short term. Long term, I don't know. Now, when you say all this stuff, and then, and just to say, so the toxins could be corrosive. They could be causing these holes, these micro tears that are minuscule, right? You couldn't see them, but they're enough for the fibrin and the platelets to form. Now, by the way, I didn't really talk about this properly, but it's not usually the plaque which causes the heart attack or the stroke. It's actually the clotting factor. It's actually the platelets that cause that. So these are super important. The cholesterol is the thing that's focused on the most, and the plaque, but it's usually the clot that actually kills you. So this clotting issue is super important as well. So anyway, we'll talk about more about that later. But so the toxicity could be corrosive enough to cause tearing. This is my non-mainstream perspective. The other thing that's a bit more easy to swallow from a mainstream perspective is that those toxins could be creating an immune response. They could be the thing that's deranging your immune system in the first place to where it's so confused that it starts attacking harmless pieces of protein, like gluten or pollen or whatever you have an allergy or an intolerance to. Some toxins, like some of the heavy metals and mycotoxins, and I'm sure there are others that I don't know about, actually shut down the function of your immune system. This is like chemical warfare. Like, endotoxin does this to some degree, though not nearly as much. The mycotoxins are really the worst, as far as I'm aware. Like all these bacteria and molds and funguses and viruses, they're kind of all constantly doing chemical warfare with each other, and often we're caught in that process. We're just caught in the middle, but they're also all doing chemical warfare against us to some degree, especially if we're like trying to kill them, and I don't mean only inside your body, right? If you find like some mold in your house and you try and clean it up, they'll let out a big load of toxins to try and get you to stop. So shutting down your immune system is just part of their chemical warfare. That's what they do. Now, shutting down, obviously they don't make you as, I don't want to over-exaggerate here, it's not going to put you in the same position as someone with AIDS, right? That has literally no immune system to fight anything off. But it is going to put you in a position where your immune system is significantly less effective. So a partial shutdown would be a more accurate way of putting it. And so inflammation, why is the immune system so messed up that this is inflamed and that is inflamed and everything? And inflammation is only supposed to be temporary. It's only supposed to be like a week or two at the most before the innate immune response starts and like deals with a specific issue. So inflammation is not supposed to be a problem you have for more than a week or two. And it's not supposed to be a problem that you have anything other than locally, unless you've had like a massive attack, like burns across your whole body or something like that. So why are we having systemic inflammation and why are we having long-term inflammation? Again, it's a question that hasn't been answered by the mainstream. And so whenever something hasn't been answered, it's either because it's so hard to work out and no one's worked it out, or the answer is actually easy. It's just something that they don't want to hear, And so going back to the interview I was talking about, when the expert was asked that, their response made me laugh, because it was not dismissing the problem. I want to address the dismissing the problem argument in a minute, because I think I want to address every argument that I've heard. But their argument was, because yes, the toxicity is not good. Yes, the poison in our atmosphere and our food and everything is not good. But because it's everywhere, it's in all our water, all our food, all our air, everywhere, it's not possible to do a scientific test to show the difference between someone who does have that exposure and doesn't. So do you see what I mean? There is no, every scientific test is based on a control.
Yeah, there's no way to control it.
For you to say that all these toxins in our environment are what are causing all of these chronic diseases that we suffer from now, like heart disease, you'd have to have, to prove that in experiment, you'd have to have a control group that doesn't have that exposure to all that toxicity. And because that's not possible, because all of us have that exposure, they can't do the experiment, and therefore they dismiss the whole idea. Now, I would say, okay, you can't do that experiment, but you could, first of all, use a bit of common sense and reasoning. And second of all, you can also do what I just said, which is look at 200 years ago or 100 years ago. And again, I know that's not conclusive. I've really given one argument why it might be different, but we can say we suffered way less with that then when we had way less toxicity, right? Now, of course, you can't do a control group with no toxicity, especially with humans. This is the thing. Like I talked in previous episodes with mice and rats, you can kind of control their environment quite well by isolating them, and you can do this a little bit. Like I talked about the experiment where they had a control group of I think it was rats. They did one group that they restricted their calories, and they did another group where they didn't restrict their calories, but they managed to remove all the heavy metals from the food. And they found that the boost in longevity was just as much from removing the heavy metals as it was from restricting the calories. So it turned out that maybe restricting calories, and I do say maybe, but maybe restricting calories doesn't increase lifespan. It's just restricting toxins improves lifespan. And if you eat less, you're also therefore eating less toxins. So you can do that kind of experiments to some degree with rats and mice. You definitely can't do them with humans. Now, what you could do with humans, of course, is go, and it would still be difficult, but you could to some degree really limit their exposure to a specific toxin. But of course, the problem is then there's so many others.
Right. So how can you there's so too many factors to try and even be able to take control of.
And the other problem, this is really one of the fundamental flaws with modern medicine and science, is who's going to pay for that experiment, right? Now, the people who should be paying for that are the government, because they're supposed to be taking our money and spending it on stuff that private enterprise is not interested in. That's not how it works, unfortunately. And I don't see how that's how it works anywhere, unfortunately. Even socialist governments are supposed to be totally focused on the people, and where there's supposed to be no focus on profit, I don't see that experimentation going on. To be honest, Russia, has done, back in the USSR days, did a decent bit of experimentation into this area of really helping people without the profit motive, and that's the whole peptides conversation that we've had before. But still, restricting access to toxins, if it exists, I haven't seen it. So anyway, now what about the argument that I also hear a lot, including someone that we know well, Chrissy, our chemist friend, he who's full of mainstream perspectives for me. They are very commonly of the perspective, okay, there's all these toxins everywhere. All right, so here's the ones I've heard. First of all, yes, there are, Elwyn, but there's also loads of natural toxins everywhere. And the amount of extra man-made ones is really no big deal, right? So, and it's true, up until recently, a lot of people had like open fires in their home. They would have been breathing loads of smoke. There's been volcanoes. There's been all kinds of air pollution throughout our history. So that's true. It's true that with a lack of sanitation, we would have been taking in all kinds of toxins, like, as I said, bacteria, mold, and all that, also create different kind of toxins. It's also true, as the people in the carnivore community love to talk about, that a lot of plant foods are actually full of toxins, natural toxins. There's oxalates, there's salicylates, debatable whether they're toxins. Even things that are classed as medicinal or herbal, like terpenes, flavonoids, can be classed as toxins. Cyanates, that are in things like apples. Apple seeds are actually related to cyanide.
Yeah, I think you could probably find something in everything that's toxic, so therefore you shouldn't have it.
Yes, that is their argument. And so, but specifically, first of all, so life is toxic, get over it. And then second of all, their argument is, and if you've got a healthy body, then your body's able to deal with that, right? So it's a fairly persuasive argument until you really think it through. So first of all, just because we have been exposed to toxicity throughout history doesn't mean it doesn't hurt us, doesn't mean it doesn't kill us, right? We've also, as far as we know, died throughout history. So what's been killing us all this time? Now, obviously, we talked about this, violent death used to account for way more deaths than it does now through something eating you or warfare or whatever. But, most of us would still die of diseases sooner or later, even throughout most of our history. What is actually causing those diseases, right? Now, as I said, in the past, as far as our records show, it was more likely to be infectious diseases that killed us rather than these modern diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, the C word. But, something has killed us, right? And so the impact of toxicity on that process of our susceptibility or ability to fight off infectious disease in the past, that's never been studied. We have no idea about that. So just because something's always affected us doesn't mean that it hasn't always been hurting us. That's the first point. Second point is that the issue is not so much volume or amount of toxins. The issue is adaptation to toxins. So the challenge is that not maybe that we're having a massively higher volume than we did 200 years ago. The issue is that, as those people would say, like, let's say, spinach is full of different types of toxins, but they're all toxins that we would have adapted to over at least thousands of years, probably tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. We have hundreds of thousands of new toxins flooding our body, which have been around for less than 100 years. So the challenge is not the volume, the challenge is the novelty and the variety, and that our body just hasn't had a chance to work out what the hell to do with it yet. And so that's the challenge. And that also might be why we have this explosion of autoimmune diseases. Because again, the immune system can deal with a lot of these toxins, because the immune system does deal with toxicity. It doesn't only deal with organisms, pathogenic organisms of all kind. It also deals with the stuff that those organisms produce, the various different toxins. And because honestly, usually it's the poisons that the organisms produce that hurt you in an infection, not the organism themselves. Not always, but usually it is the poisons. So I'm simplifying a bit, but it's basically the case. It's also they steal your nutrients and, there's other stuff, but the poisons is a big one. So the idea that we should have just already adapted to this huge influx of novel, new, never before seen toxins is absurd, right? And so that could well be the issue. And then the last part is that they say, okay, there's all these new toxins, if they acknowledge that point, but if you're healthy, your body should be able to deal with it. You've got a liver. The liver's very strong. The liver's very, resilient. You've got kidneys. You've got a lymphatic system. Don't worry about it. Now, the advice, don't worry about it, is good advice, because as we just said, stress is really bad. Stress can partially shut down the immune system. Stress can partially shut down the detoxification system. So don't worry is good advice. Please do not feel more stressed by anything that I'm saying. However, if we're talking about reality, I would say that issue of the challenge with the different detoxification organs. So let's talk about the liver and the kidneys briefly. I don't want to talk about them much because we're talking about them way more when we talk about detox in the next episode or one of our next episodes. But I'll just say this. Medicine in general has this very interesting approach to diagnosis where there's this very wide range of functioning that's considered fine. And then there's this cutoff point, and then once you're above it, then suddenly it's not fine. It's weird, and I know that we have no choice. I'm not saying I know a better way, but it's interesting in society. There's all this stuff you can't do, right? Depending on where you live. You can't smoke, you can't drink, you can't vote, you can't join the army until you're 18. And it's like, when you're 17 years old, 11 months and 29 days, are you that much less mature than the next day? Do you know what I mean? It's a bit of an arbitrary cutoff point. Yeah. But as I said, I don't have a better solution. Actually, if I were controlling things, I'd probably make it older. I'd probably make it 21 or something, but whatever. Now, the same thing goes for assessing your liver health, assessing your kidney health, assessing the health of all of these organs. But let's talk about, this idea of as long as you're healthy, you can deal with that stuff. Don't worry about it. Their idea of healthy is these liver enzymes aren't raised, creatinine and a couple of other things are not raised in terms of the kidneys. And then, if we're doing a CT scan, there's not significant scarring. You don't have fatty liver yet. You don't have hepatitis A. That's basically it. Like, if your liver is not like massively swollen to way bigger than it should be, obviously completely stuffed full of stuff that shouldn't be there, mainly cholesterol, then it's fine. Now, I would say, in the process of getting to that point of fatty liver disease, whether alcoholic or non-alcoholic, isn't there a point where the liver is functioning less well, even if it's not bad enough yet? And of course, the answer is yes. It's not binary. It doesn't go from perfect to effed, right? There is a middle point. And that middle point is where it is becoming less efficient at dealing with all that toxicity. Cholesterol is starting to build up in the liver. And it's also starting to leak into the bloodstream, because that's the other reason why cholesterol is building up in the bloodstream. It's not only as a protective mechanism, it is also, and this is the more mainstream perspective, it's also just leaking in there because excess is being produced by the liver. Why is excess being produced by the liver? Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll talk about it in a bit. Maybe we'll talk about that when we get to detoxification. But the point is, once it's leaking into the bloodstream, and yet we don't think to ourselves, that elevated cholesterol is a sign that there's something wrong with the liver. I would say that's an early warning sign of the liver not being optimal. The excess cholesterol is building up in the blood. So I do not see it as a cause. I see it as a symptom. It's a symptom of a problem that's not being recognized. So in terms of how the liver works, again, I will not talk about most of this because it's a super big topic that deserves its own episode. And I said I was going to absolutely get this one done in less than 90 minutes. But
yeah, we're getting close.
We're getting close. Okay. So I'm almost done with this. So what happens with the liver once it's overwhelmed with toxicity, for whatever reason? Let's not speculate on the reason. What happens to the liver? It can only deal with so much toxicity. It can only store certain types of toxins. Actually, most toxins it can't store. Some of the fat-soluble ones it can, and I believe that's actually why the cholesterol is formed, to help to store the fat-soluble toxins. But most of it, once it's above its level, it would actually start to damage the liver cells to have the toxicity there. Luckily, the liver has a secondary processing center, like a backup system, and it's the kidneys. So what the liver will do is it will shunt that toxicity along with some of the cholesterol back into the bloodstream for the kidneys to filter. Now, when that happens occasionally, no problem. But what happens if that's constantly happening? What if the liver, and this is a situation that we'll talk about a lot more in the next episode with detox, where you have cholestasis, which is where the bile and the cholesterol starts to get blocked and it is no longer flowing. It will keep backing up into the bloodstream, and then for the kidneys to filter, but the kidneys can only deal with so much, and that is where it then starts causing all these problems, agitating the immune system, causing inflammation, creating micro tears, building up plaque, and all the rest of it. So that's my understanding of it.
Yeah. So within that cycle of the heart and the kidneys, is that what they refer to as congestive heart failure, where it's just continuing, like it's just building, and the heart and the kidneys they can't deal with the load anymore?
Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. That's my understanding of it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, with all of that said, Owen, what can we do? How do we sort this out?
Okay. So there's two phases to this. I think first of all, as we said, all this mess, all this debris, all this blockage is being built up because of this situation. So we need to resolve the root cause situation, but we also have to solve the mess that it's caused. The mess being the stuff that kills us when it comes to heart disease, right? And so I would say you got to kind of deal with the mess first. Then you have the luxury of going, okay, let me actually go back and start looking at the root causes, which is the toxicity issue that we'll get into in another episode. So I would say there's 7 things. I've written them down here, a little list, and then we'll talk about what we can do about each one. So number 1, so here are all the things that will help to prevent something potentially lethal with heart disease. Number 1, focusing on vasodilation. So despite everything I said about blockage, as I said, another thing is that your body will constrict it more under a situation of stress. And so reducing that tendency will buy you some time, will give you some benefit, will reduce blood pressure, will make everything better. It's not solving the problem, but it will absolutely help. Reducing the cholesterol that's building up in the blood will help. Reducing the calcium that's building up in the blood will help. We talked about those are the main constituents of the plaque. Reducing the fibrin and excess clotting factors that are building up in the blood will help. Obviously, the patching over is necessary, but the scarring building up, because imagine you cut yourself a little bit, you got a scar. Imagine you cut yourself again, another scar, cut it again, like it builds up more scar till she builds up. That's the problem. That's where it actually starts to get, close to more of a blockage level. So deal with that, reduce the inflammation, reduce the rigidity and weakness, because we talked about how it becomes less able to move the blood through itself. It becomes more and more dependent on the heart. And then deal with any localized constrictions. So those are the 7 things that I would focus on. So I can just go through each one at a time. Okay, number 1, vasodilation. So the whole focus with this in the medical community is nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. However, my understanding of nitric oxide is not mainstream, is that it should be temporary. So yes, it increases, like for instance, for a man to have an erection, that's where like the big nitric oxide breakthrough was. That's where Viagra came from and all that. But they then kind of took that and went, oh, actually, this can help the heart. And I personally think that is true, but a mistake. And what do I mean by that? Because yes, nitric oxide will vasodilate everything, which will lower blood pressure while it's happening, help all the nutrients get through, all of that good stuff. But it's supposed to be an emergency stress response, and stress being good, right? Dopamine's also a stress chemical. It's not supposed to be constant. My understanding of the thing that should be vasodilating you that's totally safe and healthy on an ongoing basis is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is not a waste product. It's a nutrient that is absolutely essential. Your body cannot get oxygen from the red blood cells into your cells without it. That was proven back in 1904. This is mainstream science. And yet they still, for some weird reason, and I think I don't know if it's related to the whole thing about blaming all the problems in the planet on excess carbon dioxide, even though carbon dioxide makes plants grow, which produces more oxygen. So I don't know if it's related to that. But there's something about demonizing carbon dioxide that is not helpful and not accurate. So what raises carbon dioxide? Again, exercise, movement, not over breathing. What causes over breathing? Stress. So it's back to that. Exercise, reducing stress.
Yeah, I was going to say, you also mentioned that a certain type of breath is making sure that you're breathing through your nose and not being a mouth breather, because if you do it through the nose, then you're really helping retain that CO2, correct?
Absolutely. And it also raises nitric oxide. So often people, recommend nose breathing because it raises nitric oxide. It does both. But you're absolutely right. The main benefit and the thing that's more voluminous is the increase in carbon dioxide. Yeah. So you just basically want to leak less of it. I would say the only time you should be breathing out of your mouth is if you're talking, or if you are specifically trying to push some kind of emotion out, right? Like, oh, something like that, martial arts or whatever it might be. But other than that, always breathe through your nose, especially when you're doing intense, heavy exercise, because that will really help to build up the carbon dioxide. Oxytocin increases nitric oxide and carbon dioxide. So oxytocin is a great vasodilator. It increases both of those gases. But again, temporarily it raises nitric oxide, but more longer term carbon dioxide. And intimate trusting relationships. So if we think what I've just said, exercise, healthy relationships, especially intimate ones with people you trust, more rest, more sleep, more relaxation. All of that stuff improves carbon dioxide. The other thing that improves carbon dioxide is improving your metabolism, which I talked about in a different episode. So check out the metabolism episode for that. Strongly recommend it. It's a key part of being healthy, but we don't have time to get into it with this one. But that's one of the reasons that metabolism is so good, is because it raises carbon dioxide, which vasodilates, which lowers blood pressure, systemically. Number 2, reducing cholesterol, right? This is a big focus. Obviously, many people take drugs for this particular purpose. They often, though, take drugs which reduce the production of cholesterol. That's what statins do. My concern about that is that cholesterol is a building block for pregnenolone, as we just talked about. And pregnenolone is the building block for progesterone and testosterone, without which you cannot feel good for men and women. Different ratios, but so I'm concerned about that. There's other reasons it's not good. Cholesterol actually has many functions, but those are the ones that I'm particularly focused on. So I would prefer to lower cholesterol a different way. It's not really about diet. The thing that absolutely proved this to me is that anorexics have really high cholesterol, and they're not taking in any fat usually, let alone, high animal fats. So cholesterol is something your body makes yourself. I think this is becoming more mainstream now. I think the kind of doctors I'd criticize for not understanding what I just said about toxicity, but who are on the cutting edge, will admit what I just said, that dietary cholesterol really has nothing to do with the level of cholesterol in your blood. So that doesn't really matter. What does matter is, first of all, that not enough cholesterol is being turned into pregnenolone. Why is that? First of all, you might be low in the cofactors that help that conversion. Copper and magnesium, really important. Some of the B vitamins as well. So always good to have, good levels of magnesium. I talk about it constantly. In this case, copper really important as well. Thyroid hormone. This is not talked about by anyone other than people who specialize in thyroid, but high cholesterol in the blood up until the 1950s, for a good half a decade or more, was considered by all sensible doctors, not specialists, to be a classic sign of hypothyroidism, underactive thyroid function. If you have enough thyroid function, if you have enough T3, which is the active thyroid hormone, then you should not, unless you have something else going on, which I'll talk about, but even if you have something else going on, you'll have less cholesterol. So that was one of the classic blood test warning signs before they developed the TSH test. That was one of the classic blood tests that they would do to help diagnose hypothyroidism. So look at your thyroid levels. If you go to a mainstream doctor, they'll probably say they're fine, unless they're really bad. But if you go to a hormone optimization thyroid doctor, then they might well say, actually, this could be better, and help you to optimize it, which then should help to reduce the level of cholesterol. Not because your body's making less, but because it's converting more into pregnenolone. Now, the other thing is the issue of the cholesterol being dumped into the blood from the liver. That's a separate issue, and we have to talk about that in a different episode when we talk about toxicity. And then there is also the issue, of course, of your body putting the cholesterol on there to deal with the inflammation. So we'll talk about that in a second when we get to inflammation. But those are the things you do specifically about cholesterol. So reducing calcium in the blood. For this, I've just got one recommendation, really. It's vitamin K2. Make sure you get enough vitamin K2, especially in relation to D3. The unfortunate thing about K2 is that there is no blood test to be able to tell. Well, there is a blood test, but there's no reference range. So there's no, you should have this much, you don't have enough, you have too much with K2. But the interesting thing about K2 is that it's the only fat-soluble vitamin where there's no toxicity amount noted. The amount that people take is really low, like in micrograms. But I've seen some doctors who are giving like thousands of times as much, and there being no issue. I do not recommend that, because you're in the realm of, severe, testing, like you don't know what's going to happen. But the point is, it's really safe to take a moderate to high, by normal standards, dose of vitamin K2. What it does is it pulls excess calcium out of the blood and puts it back into the bones and teeth where you want it specifically, and also in the cells. I mean, every cell in your body needs calcium, but specifically taking it out of the blood and putting it into more storage, which is the bones and teeth. So big fan of vitamin K2. Especially, you must take it if you're taking vitamin D3. You want to have them side by side. And I would go heavy on the K2, light on the D3. I would not have a formula of a lot of D3 and low K2 personally. Or if you do, have some K2 extra. Why? Because although I don't think D3 causes any of these problems, unless you go really crazy with it, D3 does pull does the opposite. It pulls calcium out of the bones and other places and into the blood. It even, well, increases how much you absorb from digestion as well and pulls it into the blood. So if you've already got a lot of calcium build up in the blood, high D3 without K2 is going to make it worse. I think I can say that without it being a stretch. So big fan of K2. Next, reducing fibrin and excess clotting factors. For this, I really love something called nattokinase. Funnily enough, both K2 and nattokinase come from the same thing, natto, which is this disgusting looking, looks like snot, mucousy looking fermented soy product, traditionally from Japan. If you can stomach that stuff, I don't even know if I'd recommend it because it's still soy, which is a common allergen, and but the extracts from it, fantastic. Vitamin K2, fantastic. Vitamin K2, by the way, is also high in other stuff. It's high in fermented food, really high in cheese. People who are cheese addicts, I often feel like it's either they need K2 and or because they need calcium. Basically, those are the two nutrients that are super high in cheese and not really much else. So yeah, nattokinase though, I'm a big fan. It is so effective. You have to be careful with it if you're already taking blood thinners.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are there any kind of contraindications or anything that people should look out for with this one?
Definitely. So it's reducing that clotting factor, and you can reduce it too much. And, internal bleeding is also potentially an issue. As I said, it's not something I was going to get into too much because it's not the majority and it's not the thing that I've now specialized in. But you can overdo it. Yeah, so do not take it if you are already taking blood thinners, like aspirin even, or anything else. Personally, though, if I had to take a blood thinner, I would take nattokinase, not aspirin. Even though aspirin's, I think aspirin's demonized, but it's still salicylic acid, which is salicylate, which is something that a lot of people react to. There's a genetic tendency for that, so we have a genetic report on that. So just to save yourself any issue, I would prefer nattokinase. And there's also nutrients which help with that. So there's vitamin C, vitamin B6, magnesium, and zinc. I mean, really, you see over and over again what is recommended in all of my videos, right? It's B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, copper. I think those are like the most common, as they're just helpful with everything. So generally, I'd say most of those you want to supplement. If you already have a high meat diet, you don't need zinc. If you already have a high plant diet, especially nuts and seeds, you don't need copper. But yeah, other than that, most people benefit from extra magnesium. Most people benefit from extra B vitamins. Number 5, reduce inflammation. I won't talk a lot about this. We did this a lot on the chronic pain episode, I feel. So I'll just touch on a couple of points, but refer you to that. So there's the herbs. Curcumin is a big one. Green tea, hibiscus, and hawthorn are all like specific cardiovascular system anti-inflammatories. So I'll mention those here. We talked, in great detail about CBD and low-dose naltrexone, how they're more like getting to the root of the issue of excess inflammation. To some degree, they're obviously not solving the toxicity issue, if that is the issue, but they're more like dealing with underlying immune system dysregulation. Obviously, reducing stress, reducing toxins. We talked about that, and we'll talk more about how to do that properly next time. Reducing allergens and intolerances. It's all very well to say my immune system shouldn't be reacting to that, but if it is, it is. So long as you are taking in a lot of something, whether it's breathing it in or eating it, that is activating and upsetting and overstimulating your immune system, you're going to be inflamed. So, if you have a gluten intolerance, if you have an egg allergy, whatever it might be, don't be a wimp about it. Don't be a baby. Just stop eating it for a while. I know that's going to be easier said than done. It's easier than ever, though, because, restaurants these days have to conform to it because they're afraid of being sued if they give it to you and create an allergic reaction. Food packaging these days has to point it out, most of the Western countries. There's loads of free-from alternatives everywhere. So it's easier than ever because it's becoming more and more of a prevalent problem than ever. It's easier than ever to avoid that stuff. And I would recommend to do so. The good news is you don't have to do it forever. You just have to do it to sort this stuff out. Most people do have the experience that once they really sort out the detoxification issue, they which is not easy, but once they do, it's easy when you know how, but I know there's a lot of people who've been doing it for years and not getting anywhere, which we'll talk about in the next episode. But when you really deal with it, a lot of those issues do go away. Not all of them, though. If they're genetically based, they may not. And that's where it's very helpful to get, we have those tests with the intolerance package bundle, intolerance and allergies bundle and genetic insights. That can like tell you a lot of the most common ones if there's genetic basis for it. If there's genetic basis, it doesn't mean for sure it won't go away, but it means it's definitely less likely to. Rigidity and weakness. So exercise we already talked about a lot in terms of that, but I'll mention another one, and that's hot and cold, especially cold. So having cold shower, cold bath is really like great exercise for the whole cardiovascular system, and including the lymphatic system, especially going between the two, hot and cold. It absolutely, so when you expose these things to cold, they absolutely like straighten up and rigidified, and when you expose them to heat, they kind of like flop and like relax. And going back and forth between the two is like a workout for your system. This is one of the reasons why these people who are into this extreme cold thing that Wim Hof has kind of pioneered the science of. But to be fair, people have been into it for a long time. They often seem so tough and so healthy and vital, is because of it affects other systems, like being able to control your own nervous system and all the rest of it by having that mental control is great. But if we're talking about on a purely physical level, that tonifying, that strengthening of the cardiovascular system is major. So I do not recommend it to people who are already on the quite far along the path of stress that we talked about in the last episode, but for anyone who can handle it, fantastic. And then lastly, constrictions, localized constrictions. So you talked about the left side being much higher blood pressure than the right side. There's various reasons for that. I think you said, in your mother's case, it was kind of explainable with the treatment she was going through, but sometimes there's no easy explanation for it. And so this really became clear to me when I came across a system called counterstrain, which I talked about in a previous episode. So counterstrain is like generally like this treatment for people in pain. But the interesting thing about it to me is that it is the way that it views health in the body. It's kind of unique. And it basically views the body as a series of tubes. And this is everything. So obviously there's the cardiovascular system, but the nerves are tubes. The muscles are filled with, tubes, like even the bone is technically a tube. Like everything they see is a bunch of tubes. And so from their perspective, a lot of health issues are simply that these tubes are kind of crunched up. They're constricted, they're pinched or whatever. And so I got a lot of benefit from doing a series of treatments for that. A lot of people do with pain. Like it's like the one thing that works when nothing else works. But I'd say the benefits are definitely beyond pain. And one of them is like, absolutely, I experienced again and again, I'd go there and the practitioner would be like, oh yeah, this artery is constricted, this vein is constricted. And then sure enough, after they did it, I, like feel this warmth and, an area that may have been, not doing too well. Like, because from their point of view, the pain is, actually, I don't know if they say this, but my understanding of their point of view is that the pain is due to a buildup of lactate, which is this acid. That lactate comes when a cell is anaerobic. Excess lactate comes when a cell has excess anaerobic. So when it doesn't have enough oxygen, why would an area of your body not have enough oxygen? Like a local area rather than the body in general. A local area body might not have enough oxygen because there is not enough circulation, blood, arterial flow getting to a specific area, and there may not be enough venal flow as well, removing that lactate. And so then that's where pain builds up. So they work at it actually of like, it's not the only thing they do, but restoring blood flow restores the oxygen to that area, which then deals with the pain in the cases when often nothing else works. So the fact that it works for that tells me it could also help for where there are these localized blockages that are caused by, as I say, like a pinching rather than an obstruction inside. They claim that a lot of these issues are actually caused by that. I don't know about that. It's not the mainstream view, but I believe it's at least some of the time, and it's worth exploring if you're really going all out and doing everything you can.
Very good list. That's a great place for us to start and get started. There was one thing that popped up for me. We did talk about certain signs, symptoms that can be indicators. And I know that there's some talk out there about the health of the teeth and the gums and a potential relationship with the cardiovascular system. Can you briefly touch on that?
Yeah, so my understanding of that is that so we talked about the mouth is technically outside the body as far as your immune system is concerned. Mouth being part of the whole digestive tract. And so there's this definite statistical correlation, which is absolutely undeniable, undenied by the mainstream, as far as I know, between chronic gum disease, gum infection, and heart disease. My understanding of why that is because it's one of the reasons why the immune system becomes overstimulated and starts attacking its own tissues is because there is chronic infections. We talked a lot about toxicity. I did talk about chronic infections a bit, but not much. I talked about it in previous episodes, like the digestion episode. But it's another reason. So having that chronic infection in the gums will create that inflammatory tendency, which then will also spread to the rest of the body, especially the cardiovascular system. I think, and I don't believe it's been proven, unless I'm forgetting something or don't know something, that there's actually a specific correlation between that tissue in the mouth and then the cardiovascular tissue, and that's why it creates more of an issue, the cardiovascular system, than other systems. But as I said, I'm not sure if that's been proven, but I would speculate that as to why there is that correlation. I do see it more as correlative than causative, though. I definitely recommend that people deal with the chronic infections in their body. We haven't got there yet, although I've mentioned it in previous episodes, but it is one of the things that if you don't deal with it, nothing might work. You won't get better no matter what else you do. So chronic fungal infection, like on the foot or in the genital area, chronic sinus infection, chronic respiratory infection, chronic urinary tract infection, chronic mouth, gums infection, any of the chronic digestive system infections, SIBO, SIFO, any of these kind of things will absolutely over time mess with the proper function of the immune system, which can create systemic inflammation. So the reason I talked a lot more about toxicity is because we're talking about what's different, because 200 years ago, we all had probably, a lot of us also had these chronic infections, and yet we didn't have these problems that we're talking about today. So that's why I don't believe that it's the factor, but I definitely think it's a factor.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I was going to get into my next question, but I think you've pretty kind of gone over it comprehensively, at least this new now, not non-mainstream, idea around what cardiovascular disease and why it's so prevalent. Because I was going to say, it is the leading cause of death. So, why do you think that is for us now? I mean, I know there's there's a lot more chemicals going on. Do you think there's anything else to add to that?
It's easy to say that it's big business that is the issue. Like there's too much profit being made from people not resolving this issue. But I don't know, because I think probably even these pharmaceutical CEOs and major shareholders and all the rest of it probably also have the same cardiovascular disease that kills them. So if the profit motive is a factor, I think it's more unconscious. I don't think they're deliberately, drumming their fingers together and we're not going to tell them. I think it's more, when you have so much riding on something being a certain way, you unconsciously defend against an attack and undermine anything that might be a threat, but maybe you honestly believe that it's misinformation or whatever. It's interesting how the cognitive dissonance, how the brain works when you're trying to present, defend an opinion or a point of view, let alone if you're defending what you believe is your livelihood and your children's livelihood and all the rest of it. So I don't know about that. As I say, it's interesting to hear a pure, more honest scientist type admitting that the reason that they don't account for it is simply because they can't test for it because there's no control group. So I think, there's different reasons. But the bottom line is they're ignoring the root issue. And in fact, again, I'll say this carefully. I don't want to get chucked off this channel. But not only are people, you know, making a lot of money and getting a lot of power and all that stuff by, you know, giving things that treat symptoms rather than resolve issues, but honestly, a lot of people are making a lot of money and power and all the rest of it by exacerbating the problem. I'll say one that won't get me in trouble: the food industry. You know, like everyone knows that a lot of these foods are really bad for you, and yet it's legal. Not only is it legal, because I believe in freedom, but it's subsidized. That's the thing that I have issue with. They forcibly take our money and then pay it to support the production of these foods that contribute to this issue. I think, admittedly, this is what I say, I don't think this is a controversial opinion. So, and then there's other ways that we're being poisoned that we're not allowed to talk about. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's the way that the world is, you know. It's an opportunity in the sense that it, you know, for those who want to excel, it's quite easy to excel because you can just not be as stupid and self-destructive as the culture and the mainstream education system is trying to get you to be. And, you know, in terms of those who care and want to help, it's easy to help people. You know, I'm doing this. I don't have a degree in this, right? As I said, I've only done a few months research. And look, I'm not making any claims, but I would rather listen to my own counsel on this than anyone who has been through 12 years of education, right? Because they don't understand this stuff. So there's also an opportunity to help others. I guess that's the point that I'm making. But yeah, it's hard to answer that question without saying something very controversial.
It's not an easy space. It's just one of those things that is something like you've been stating, you know, that is so prevalent. And in today's age where we do have such the technological advances and the, you know, brilliant minds behind everything, that just keeps getting worse.
And this is the thing, that we have so much smarter people working on this than me, and so many more. I do acknowledge that. But the problem is, they're focused in the wrong direction. This is the challenge, and they're hamstrung. I love the scientific method. I love the empirical method. I hugely think it's better than superstition and all the rest of it. But this idea of like how you can only test isolated testing isolated variables is good, and testing is good, and the clinical method is good, and the scientific method is good. Everything is good. But the idea that means that you can't use common sense to create more broad understandings, I think is the problem. Like I've attempted to do in this episode, you know, like testing everything is good, but just because you can't test something doesn't mean it's not true.
Very well said. So I do want to touch on one space of, you know, we do go for our annual exams, blood tests, things like that. We've talked about certain signs and symptoms that we can potentially look for, but what are the blood tests and what are the things that, you know, we can, as you said previously, it's not just here's the number and at the end, that's when it stops working. You know, what are the things that we can look for within the blood tests that can help us identify earlier, as we know this is not something that, you know, it's a little bit silent of understanding whether we actually have this condition in our lives?
Well, I'll give the mainstream answer first. I really gave the genetic insights answer to you know, test, but that's only going to tell you a risk, not any certainty whatsoever. So in terms of the actual test, most common ones are actually not blood tests if they actually suspect a real issue, like say because you've got very high blood pressure. So it's an ECG, electrocardiogram. They're looking for abnormal rhythms. They might get you to do a stress test, so where they get you to do some intense exercise and then see what happens to, you know, various readings, again, ECG, heart rate, all the rest of it. There's an echocardiogram, so that's not looking at the electrical signals. That's a little bit like a CT that's using sound waves to create like a map. because obviously, something that's going on inside you, they can't just open you up to look. Well, they can actually. That's one of the things, but it's not easy, not desirable. So it's like creating this kind of map of what's going on using something like sonar, if that helps to understand it. Then there is actually invasive ones, so like cardiac catheterization. That'll literally get right into the heart itself and look for blockages and test the pressure of it. So that's something that will be done. All those four tend to be more stuff that they'll do when they already think there's a problem. More preventative stuff. So there's a calcium test score. This is looking at the level of calcium in the artery. So calcium is quite a heavy element, so it's a bit easier to spot. Obviously, bone is primarily made of calcium. So there's kind of a way these days of actually testing that called computed tomography, CT scan. So they will then usually come up with a score, coronary artery calcium score. My understanding is that that's better than most of the other things that I've talked about, but it's still not ideal. It will tell you how blocked you are, but it will not tell you necessarily how at risk you are for a serious incident. And so my understanding of what's better for that is what they call a coronary CT angiography. So this gets more refined into what we just talked about, and this will actually look at the level of the softer plaque that looks like it's more likely to break away. Because again, statistically, what they found is that you sometimes have people with really high calcium score, and yet they live for a long time because it's all, just hard and firm and stuck there. The thing that kills you is when a bit gets loose, the clot gets out, starts to proliferate, and then it's like a full blockage. So yeah, that's a good one that is becoming more popular these days. Blood tests, so the classic ones are cholesterol, triglycerides, other markers of inflammation. Most commonly is C-reactive protein, CRP, often called high sensitivity CRP. So yeah, different types of cholesterol, HDL, LDL, ratio of HDL to LDL, stuff like that. That's kind of the common stuff. As I said, cholesterol, it is a sign of a problem. I don't personally view it as the thing to deal with. I think personally, my personal opinion, for my own sake, taking something to reduce cholesterol, to me, is not resolving the issue. If it's stopping the body's production of cholesterol, it's just, it's like cheating to reduce a marker, but it doesn't really help. And in fact, there is plenty of statistical analysis that show that having your cholesterol on the high end of the healthy scale is actually good. And again, I don't think it's genuinely good, but meaning that you're actually, statistically predictive, you're better off with that than not having it. And I speculate that the reason for that is because it's protective, right? Even though it's not good because it shows the problem, it's protective. So yeah, as we talked about, I would rather take something that converts that cholesterol into the next step rather than taking something that stops you from making it in the first place. But anyway, those are the common tests. There's a lot made about LDL cholesterol being bad and HDL being good. Again, I think in terms of correlation, it's pretty irrefutable that high LDL does correlate with more issues, but causation, I think, is a bit shakier. It may well just be a sign that there's a problem. It may actually be an attempt of your body to fix a problem rather than the cause of the problem, And it kind of makes sense that the mainstream doctors would have this perspective, because remember, other than giving drugs, the other thing they do is cut people open. And so when you cut someone open, like their heart, and you see all this white gunk in there, and you measure it, and there's loads of cholesterol and there's loads of LDL, and you remove it and then you save their life, it's very easy to think that's the problem, right? That stuff I just cut open and pulled out of someone and now they're okay again is the problem. It's it makes sense to think that way, but of course it's not thinking very deeply. It's not thinking, okay, but why is that stuff there in the first place? And why is it there these days way more than it used to be, and all the stuff we've really talked about, right? But again, on a simple level, you can see why they made that leap. I think these days, ApoA is becoming quite a big one, or apolipoprotein A, sorry. We actually have that added to genetic insights now, so we can test for the genetic tendency for it. So this is one of the proteins that transports cholesterol, and basically, long story short, because I know we're over time, high levels of it are a better predictor than LDL cholesterol. Again, I don't think it is the cause of the problem, but to answer your question, you're right. What tests give good indicators? That is a good indicator. I would also add to that liver function tests, kidney function tests, especially in terms of liver function. I would look at bile acids, the level of bile acids in the blood. The common one is bilirubin that they test, but there's a more full spectrum like bile acids one, because it will, which I think tests 5 different bile acids, because it tells you, is the problem that your liver is overloaded, and even though they can't see it on the CT scan yet, in other words, you haven't got fatty liver disease yet, it is dumping that excess cholesterol into your bloodstream. So it kind of helps you narrow down, is the issue that your arteries are so corroded and inflamed that your body's using cholesterol as a protective mechanism, or is the issue that your liver's so overloaded that it's dumping cholesterol along with other bile acids and toxins into the blood for the kidneys to deal with because it's overloaded? Of course, the situation is usually both, but it will at least give you an indicator of like how bad that specific liver situation is. So that's a good one, if you can afford it, or if someone will cover it and pay for it. Another one I would strongly recommend, which I've talked about loads before, is thyroid, for the reasons we talked about before. The people who specialize in this basically say, if you optimize your thyroid and get it to the right level, your chances of any cardiovascular disease go way down, not just the cholesterol blood marker. Can I prove that? No, but as we're just optimizing something which improves your metabolism, which makes everything better, in general, it doesn't seem like a massive leap to me. So I would strongly recommend it. And I would also look at steroid hormones. I would also look at, your testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, others if you can, because if those are low, and cortisol, it's also a steroid hormone. If those are across the board low, you're not feeling good, then the last thing you want to be doing is lowering your cholesterol. You want to be converting more cholesterol to them rather than lowering your cholesterol. So that's why I test it. And of course, those steroid hormones also have a massive impact on stress. And stress is one of the key things that's mainstream that can contribute to heart disease. So I'd also look at it from that point of view. We talked a lot about that in the stress episode and in the thyroid episode and in the hormone episodes.
Yes, yeah. If you want to dig deeper, definitely check those episodes out for some more in-depth conversations. But Ellen, it's been, very educational as it always is. And before we come to a close, are there any other final thoughts that you want to add to our listeners?
Well, shameless product placement. I know that as I said, I started this journey to, investigate a formula. I suspect a lot of people are going to be watching this because I'm going to be sending it to them, is people who've already bought that. But in case you're someone who hasn't already, and if it's available at the moment, because it's not always available, we'll put a link in there for Cardio Shield. That's the product that I formulated specifically based around this. I'm not saying on its own it will do it. Obviously, I've been 100% honest with you. I'm saying there's lifestyle factors involved. I think toxicity factors are involved that we'll talk about, but that I don't have products for. But still, just in terms of helping your body with that cleanup, it contains nattokinase, K2, green tea, B6, magnesium, zinc. A lot of those things that I talked about are all in one, handy formula. So if you enjoyed this episode and got value out of it, and you haven't already taken that and you want to support the channel, it's a good way of doing it.
Thank you, Ellen. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you for staying with us. And hopefully you liked what you heard, so you continue to see us every week. And if that's the case, please make sure you like and subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss an episode. And we will see you next time. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I want to tell you about a way that you can support the podcast while also getting great deals on high quality supplements that Elwyn and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is that they have great quality products with minimal fillers at a very affordable price. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're very helpful and friendly. And the thing I love most of all is the amazing descriptions that Elwyn has written about each product category on that topic. And each product has so much education on it that I've actually learned more from reading the descriptions than I have from a lot of articles. So to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, use promo code RejuvenateMe for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order using promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net.